All right, everybody, welcome back to the Renowned Leadership Podcast, where we bring you insights and conversations with top experts in leadership, business, entrepreneurship, and personal development. Whether you're a new or seasoned leader, we're here to help you achieve your goals and reach your full potential. Now, before we get started, I want to bring you to one of our latest resources. If you're retiring from the military and stepping into the corporate world, we have a resource that helps you prepare to start your new corporate career and make the transition smoother. Our specially designed checklist for military veterans is available for download on our website, renownedleadership.com. So make sure you take advantage of this tool to ensure your successful transition into your new role. In addition, we're also really excited to announce our partnership with the Career Winner Circle, or CWC. They have a roster of top-notch executive coaches and an amazing pool of resources for their clients. To learn more about CWC and how they can help you on your leadership journey, visit their website, careerwinnercircle.com. And if you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, take the next step in your journey, schedule a complimentary coaching consultation with us or me at renownedleadership.com. We're here to help you achieve your goals and take your leadership to the next level. So welcome back, everybody, to the journey of the workplace hero, from average employee to outstanding performer. This is a 10-episode podcast series that is specifically designed to just help you take your career to the next level and become a hero of your workplace. If you're ready to break away from the crowd and become a standout performer in your workplace, this series is 100% for you. With topics ranging from leadership and communication to time management, and far beyond that, our expert guests will share their insights and expertise to guide you on your journey to becoming a workplace hero. So get ready to unleash your full potential and transform into the workplace hero your workplace needs. With all that being said, everybody, I am so excited to bring you guys our next guest this week, and she is a really special treat for you guys. She's a good friend of mine. She's a board certified physician and a clinical psychologist as well. And she's here to talk to us for the next 3 weeks. Actually, we're going to be talking about anxiety, stress, depression in your personal life and in the workplace as leaders and employees. And we're going to be going over tips and tricks on how to diffuse these things in our lives, and how to identify when it's becoming a problem. So I really hope you guys are going to enjoy and get a lot out of this conversation with Dr. Christy Walter. She has an amazing program called, you can check out her website, it's doggonedepression.com. And she has an amazing program where she teaches you to deal with anxiety. And it's all online based learning. And she's getting results in months rather than years of the traditional therapy. So if you guys are struggling, or you know someone that's struggling, I highly recommend you go to doggonedepression.com, check out her website and her program, and get yourself or the people in your loved ones, the people in your life, get them the help that they need, and get them introduced to this really interactive and amazing program that Dr. Christy has created. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into our topic for the day, which is anxiety. I give you Dr. Christy Walter, and so here we go. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Renowned Leadership Podcast. I am so excited to be here with you guys. Thank you for joining me again. My name is Stephen Morris. I'm the founder and CEO of Renowned Leadership and your amazing podcast host on the Renowned Leadership Podcast. And today I am honored to be joined by the amazing Dr. Christy Walter. Good afternoon, Dr. Christy. How are you doing today?
Hello, hello. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you here, and today we are going to talk about some pretty serious stuff, and it's very important. However, I feel like that we, especially as leaders in corporations and in companies, or in just in business in general, we need to understand these things, and we need to be able to identify them and get people the help they need, especially nowadays, with suicide rates being so high, and clinical depression being so high, and anxiety rates being so high. Like, we need to start taking a proactive approach as leaders to really start understanding some of these things, not to the extent that you do, but to the extent that we're able to identify and get people the help they need. So before we dive into all that, though, Dr. Christie, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself a little bit, because your background is so extensive. I don't even want to try, because I'm going to butcher it. So I want to give you a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and give them your amazing list of qualifications. So go ahead and do that.
All right. Thank you very much. So, yes, I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I am a board certified emergency medicine physician. I've been practicing for 22 years now, medicine. Formerly a psychotherapist. I have my master's degree in psychology, and I was a counselor at one point. I worked in crisis counseling, hospice counseling with the Vietnam veterans in San Diego. Currently doing emergency medicine. And how it is that you have me on your program is that because of my own experiences and my desire to kind of give back and make my testimony into something that can help other people, I've combined all my years of clinical experience with my own personal struggles with anxiety and depression, and created an online program geared to helping people with anxiety and depression.
That is fantastic, and that touches on something that it's a personal belief or mantra. I don't even know what you would call it of mine, but I've, from my military background, you and I have actually talked about this before, of where I don't like talking to a therapist that hasn't experienced my experiences. And from a soldiering standpoint, it's picking up your friend's body parts, or whatever the case may be, taking another person's life. These are experiences that like reading a book isn't, classroom study isn't going to prepare you for that experience, and you can only truly understand me by going through it yourself. And I love that about your practice, because, like you said, your program is built solely off what you experienced through your life. And I think that's amazing, and I commend you for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've combined all my clinical experience, but intertwined that with my own personal struggles, and came up with high yield action steps that people can implement from day one. Because I feel like the way mental health is treated in this country is lacking. If it took as long to get better from diabetes and hypertension as it does from mental health disorders, we've been in a world of hurt. I see that the way we approach mental health is just not sufficient to meet the needs of the people who are struggling. Going in for a 50-minute session once every other week, maybe you get a tool out of it, maybe not. Maybe you just spend the time, rehearsing whatever issues are going on in the problem, never really getting the solution. And so, as somebody who has been a consumer of mental health care, and having my own frustration with it, and I can't tell you how many times I left a counseling session worse than when I went in. I remember one time I called my therapist from the parking lot because I was so undone I couldn't get home. I thought there has to be a better way. That the limited tools that were being provided just weren't cutting it. And I came up with a program that uses all the high yield things. Anything that ever worked for me makes sense. And I've combined it into a program that's high yield, implementing steps from day one.
I love it. And so when we talk about clinical depression, anxiety, stress, all that stuff, I feel like even this day and age, there's still a pretty gnarly stigma, if you will, regarding mental health. Like, in your experience, do you feel like that's still a thing? Like, people are still scared of seeking help because they're afraid of the label that they'll be given?
Most definitely, in the medical community, for example, physicians have the highest rate of suicide in terms of a population than the general population. About 200 doctors every year commit suicide. And one of the reasons that it is so rampant and why it's such a problem is because physicians tend not to get help. I think also people see mental health illnesses as a character defect, like you could just get over it. And why are you acting that way? And, as a needs to be managed and treated. I mean, personally for myself, even I thought I had a character defect, that if I just worked harder, that if I just thought happy thoughts, that I, even for myself, accept that I had a condition that I needed to manage and needed proactive tools to overcome it. So it's a societal stigma, it's a personal stigma. Most people, they're too ashamed to get help, or they don't realize that there's help out there, or maybe they've tried to get help and they haven't benefited from it, and so they give up.
Yeah, and that's definitely where I fall into the spectrum. Is I just got tired of it. I got tired of talking and talking and talking and listening and listening and listening and nothing ever changing. So I pretty much just gave up, like you said. So I want to go ahead and dive into our topic for today before we run out of time, which is we're going to be talking about anxiety, the types of anxiety. Unbeknownst to me, there are many types of anxiety, which I didn't know that before I started researching for this and talking to you. The many symptoms of anxiety, and then ultimately we want to talk about the treatments, be it ways to work your mindset to kind of treat yourself, for the low hanging fruit, if you will, and then full blown, like, you need some professional help, and how to find that and really get to a program that's going to help you. So first off, Dr. Christie, again, I just want to thank you so much for venturing on this project with me. And I would like you to go ahead and or not identify, just explain to us the difference between anxiety and stress.
Sure. So I'm not going to dive into every single condition that exists, but a handful of anxiety disorders, if you will, include like panic disorder, where people experience panic attacks, where their heart rate increases, the respiratory rate increases, they become panicked. Then there's social anxiety, where people experience anxiety in the presence of crowds or anxieties that are around public speaking and specific things like that. Generalized anxiety is a disorder that is characterized by an excessive amount of worry, so much so that it interferes with a person's daily activities. It can be accompanied with physical symptoms like jitteriness, can't sit still, trouble concentrating, trouble thinking, having this sense of impending doom, feeling excessively fatigued and yet not being able to sleep. In extreme, the anxiety can be so bad that you experience panic with elevated heart rate, respiratory rate, sweating, and inability to, perform. It's very common. Anxiety actually is the most common mental health disorder, affecting 1 in 5 adults. So there's a good chance that in your organization or any organization, there are a handful of employees that suffer from this, perhaps untreated or under the radar, but they're out there.
Now, you say 1 in 5. That doesn't necessarily mean it's severe, correct? Like just because 1 in 5 people have the disorder, it's different stages, correct? Like it's not crippling anxiety. Or are you saying 1 in 5 people have crippling anxiety?
1 in 5 people have generalized anxiety, which can be crippling.
Okay.
Of
Wow.
course,
I
everybody's
didn't.
different. And
Mhm.
if you think about, gradation, you have mild to severe. Um, so yes, it's not necessarily crippling for everybody, but it can be.
Okay. So, and I was just thinking about that, I get anxiety when I drive just because people around here drive like they're driving on a racetrack. It's insane how recklessly people drive around here. And I just came back from Florida and I thought it was bad in Indianapolis. It's even worse in Florida. Um, so they drive like crazy in Florida. And so that gives me anxiety. I don't enjoy driving on interstates and highways. Driving on a backcountry road, that's fine. Um, but it's not to the point to where I think I need uh clinical help
Mhm.
to deal with that, right? Is that reasonable, or does any anxiety need to be treated?
Yeah, no, that's very reasonable. When you think about what's happening, you're experiencing the stress response when you're in that kind of traffic, and our body, our brain doesn't know the difference between being chased by a lion or a traffic jam. So it elicits the same kind of response physiologically. You have the fight or flight mechanism gets triggered by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, releasing endorphin, I'm not endorphins, excuse me, epinephrine, norepinephrine, which is going to cause the heart rate to go up, respiratory rate to go up. It's going to trigger the emotional part of the brain known as the amygdala. So you're going to be in this fight or flight state. And so that stressor of the traffic is triggering that physiologic response, which manifests as feelings of anxiety.
Awesome. So that actually makes a lot of sense now. And types of anxiety like that are fairly common, are they not?
Sure, because stress is universal. We're all going to experience stress, and because that stress response, like I said, is the same for being chased by a tiger as it is for traffic jam, or maybe uh, work related. Deadlines coming up, and you got
Hmm.
the clock running. It's going to trigger all the same physiologic responses, and that sense of anxiety can develop. Does it mean you have a full-blown clinical disorder? No, not necessarily.
Okay. Awesome. So can you go over just a few of the triggers leaders are going to experience within their organizations as far as anxiety goes, especially if they're in a high paced, high pressure environment like I mean Wall Street or doctors or some sort of an environment like that. What are some common triggers for anxiety that they might be looking out for?
So you have work expectations, maybe deadlines that need to be met. You're maybe managing employees that are underneath you, and things need to run smoothly because the buck stops with you, right? And so that high demand, high energy requirement can be very stressful, and that stress again triggers that stress response, and it can manifest as feelings of anxiety. um, I mean, just for me, just walking into the emergency department triggers that stress response. I never know what I'm going to see. There's a million things going on. You got patients coming and going, critical cases, traumas coming in, nurses asking you questions, paperwork needs to be done. I mean, all that is stressful and can increase your heightened sense of anxiety. And I think leaders in any profession who have any kind of responsibility are going to have times when they feel more stressed than others. And then that stress, if prolonged and intractable, can develop into an anxiety problem.
Right. And so what can we do is it possible to manage these reactions, or do we have to manage the stressors?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's always better to be proactive than reactive. Once you're in the middle of the heat, trying to dampen things down, it gets to be a little bit harder. But if you have tools in place and habits that you have in place that you use ahead of time, it makes it much easier to get a hold of your emotions in the moment. For example, one of the things that's crucial is self-care. And what does that mean? It means a couple of things. It means proper nutrition so that your brain has the fuel it needs to function properly. When you don't get the sufficient micro and phytonutrients, it dampens your ability to produce serotonin and dopamine. Those are mood regulating neurotransmitters. Also, sleep is crucial. When we're sleeping, we consolidate memory. When we're sleeping, toxins are removed from the body. And it is a time when hormones are balanced. So inadequate sleep can cause reduction in serotonin, for example. Not getting enough water. Our brains are like 85% water, and it's important for cell-to-cell communication. And being dehydrated can contribute to mood-related issues. So basic self-care has to be part of your daily life. Then when it comes to actually dealing with heightened stress and feelings of anxiety, there are some tools I like to use ahead of time that I do at home. So for example, breathing exercises, where you do deep breathing, you hold it, and then you release it. Anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes a day, because that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to calm our bodies down. So if you have some kind of breathing practice like that, for example, that you do on your own time, then when you're in a work situation and you start feeling the stress or the anxiety, you can kick into gear and do some breathing exercises right then and there. And because it's not awkward because you've been practicing it, that can help give you a quick parasympathetic surge, and it can help calm things down.
I love that. And I'm a big fan of breathing exercises, and to the point, um, you know, race car drivers, right? Like a lot of times, as it's getting close to the end of the race, and or things are getting crazy in the race, their crew chief or their coach or whatever you want to call them is in their ear, and you'll hear them on TV every once in a while. Just, hey man, just calm down, take a breath, right? Kind of encouraging that breathing, like just breathe. Fighter pilots constantly are being reminded to breathe. That is a huge part of their training when they're in flight school, is how to regulate and control your breathing, because that's so important, not just during high G exercises, but in the super stressful environments, whether they're in a dogfight or they're trying to keep their plane under control or whatever, that they have that system that's reminding them to breathe. That is amazing advice. And a lot of times, like when I'm working with somebody, it's like, hey man, just take a breath, just stop and take a breath. And I don't think we realize just how important it is to practice that breathing.
Right. Really, it really is. And to try and rely on it when things are, at its heightened state, it's not going to be as effective as if you have a practice in place that you do ahead of time, because then it's easier to pull out that tool and use it.
Absolutely. And that goes with everything. Everything requires practice, right? Like, the more you do something, the more it becomes habitual, and then your brain can just do it automatically, right? Is that kind of a good
Exactly.
a comparison?
There's another exercise I like to do. I actually start with this in the morning. I do a brain dump exercise. I take 2 minutes, and because I wake up thinking about all the things I have to get accomplished on that any given day, which can be anxiety producing in and of itself. So I start my day with a 2-minute brain dump. I pull out a piece of paper and a pen. I give myself just 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes. I literally dump out all the crazy that's going on in my head. Then I stop, I put my pencil down, and I ask myself, okay, based on what I'm writing, what am I feeling right now? And maybe it's anxious. And so then I have to set my intention in a direction that I would prefer. Perhaps it's calm or focused. And then I pick an action to lead me in that direction. So if you're in the middle of a work environment and you're feeling stressed and anxious, you could do a 2-minute brain dump and then do a pivot by setting your intention and getting focused. But at least it gets some of that energy out, and it's an intentional way of shifting gears.
I love that actually. I do something similar. I call it my defrag journal, like you defrag a computer. But I do it every night before I go to bed. And like you, I have a set amount of time that I do it, and I just write all the junk that's got cluttered up in my head throughout the day. And I've learned that my sleep is so much more peaceful. It's so much deeper. It's just better sleep because I've relieved my brain of garbage, and then my brain can start sorting through um the important stuff, if you will. It doesn't have to filter it out anymore because I've already consciously done that. And now it's just focusing on the important things. Is that how it works? Is that why I
That's
feel
how it
better when
works.
I do it?
Yeah, you can do that process as many times during the day as needed. It's a good way to wind down at the end of the day as well. I totally agree. And of course, moving. If you can get up and change the scenery for a few minutes, go take a walk, do your breathing. That's another thing that can be done. In fact, I think lunch breaks are great. Employees need them, but I think if a few minutes every day can be added to an employee's break time, just to maybe move and breathe and decompress, would be useful.
Just get off the
One of
work
the hardest things,
floor.
yeah, exactly. One of the hardest things in my job is there's always something coming. It's like you're never done, whether you're charting or you're seeing the next patient, and the ER can be extremely busy. And my colleagues have told me in the past that if you take a few minutes and just walk away, you'll actually be more productive. Because I
Hmm.
used to resist that, thinking, oh, I got this to do and I got that to do. And after I do such and such, I'll get something to drink or whatever. And it never comes. So you have to be intentional about setting some time to decompress during the workday.
Right. And so that kind of leads into my next question, Dr. Christie, of how important is workplace culture to managing and mitigating anxiety, especially in high stress positions, like the culture. How much play does it have into all of that?
When employees feel like they're valued and they have a voice, things go better. In cultures where you feel like a manager perhaps is overbearing, doesn't care about them as a person, has unrealistic work expectations or time deadlines, that can foster a lot of angst and stress and anxiety for people. May have heard of the term quiet quitting, uh, where people start just doing the very bare minimum needed to keep their job. They don't go above and beyond. And that may be to prevent burnout, but it may be a result of burnout, where you kind of lose the I care about this job, and you just want to get through the day. And that's no way to experience work. I mean, so having an environment where there's camaraderie, where it's a team effort and collaborative, it's much better than a hierarchical structure where demands are being, barked at people.
Right, right. And so you talk about quiet quitting. Um, that can be a direct result of what we're talking about today, right? And the just that anxiety, because no one likes to feel that anxiety. So whenever you're having that Sunday anxiety of having to go to work tomorrow, that ultimately can play a big factor into quiet quitting, can it not?
Definitely, most definitely can. I remember there was a time when I would drive to work to the ER and I would start having a panic attack on my way there because I was already overwhelmed by how much there was going to be to confront. Um, yeah, that's an awful way to experience one's job. It, it definitely fosters disengagement.
Hmm. Yeah. And especially nowadays, I feel like Uh, I, I I don't know. I kind of don't like the term quiet quitting, to be honest with you, Dr. Christie, because I feel like it's something that's always existed, and we just put a label on it now, and
Right.
now everybody's treating it like it's this new thing. And I don't really feel like it is a new thing. I feel like that's always been human nature, and we're just now paying attention to it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
definitely a new thing. It used to be called doing the bare minimum.
right, yeah. So I mean, it's just kind of like the new trend, I guess, if you will, the quiet quitting. But it's definitely a problem, and I definitely feel like if we focus on culture more and start addressing issues like these and really paying attention to the stress and anxiety within the workplace, and addressing that people aren't robots, right? Like, we aren't physically built for the stress that comes with running into a burning building if you're a firefighter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our brains aren't built for that type of environment, right?
Right.
Like, our brains aren't built to be a cop or a soldier and getting shot at. That experience is, I would say, brain shaping, right? There cannot be a loud pop to this day, and it's been, I would say, a decade since I got shot at last time. Like, to this day, I will still jump every time I hear something unexpected that sounds similar to a gunshot,
Mm-hmm.
and my brain instantly goes into, I'm being shot at, I need to seek cover. And as you now, I've gotten it to where it's just, a little jump, and then I get back control of my brain, and it's like, no, no, we're good. It's not a gunshot. Calm down. But like, our brains are not built for these sorts of environments, right? So when we don't pay attention to the mental health aspect of it, we're really doing a huge disservice to ourselves and our ability to cope, because our brains are powerful. They can overcome these things, but they can only overcome them if we do it in a healthy way, right? Is that a valid statement?
Yeah, I mean, humans are very resilient. You know, our bodies and our minds can manage a lot. It's when you have cumulative and or life-threatening situations where the impact can start to really change and then you develop ways of being based on your trauma, because the emotional brain, the amygdala, takes over and you get hijacked by that. That's I would argue part of the problem is it's cumulative trauma and or unprocessed trauma that fosters that
Okay.
reaction.
So you brought it up. So there you correct me if I'm wrong. There are three different main types or categories of trauma, or is it just two?
No, there's many kinds of trauma. There's acute trauma, of course, you know, like being in a car accident, that's an acute event. There's chronic trauma, where perhaps if you think about the people in Ukraine who are constantly exposed to military action, um, bombings and what have you, it's chronic day in, day out. There's complex trauma, uh, which can lead to CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that kind of trauma is where it's repetitive trauma that typically occurs in childhood at the hands of someone who's supposed to be caring for you. You can see that in domestic violence as well. You have generational trauma, where perhaps a people group has been harmed. For example, the Holocaust survivors carry that with them, and that gets carried into their family line. You know, it's a story that goes from generation to generation. So there's some generational trauma there. Vicarious trauma, you know, seeing other people traumatized can cause trauma in the person witnessing the other person's suffering. Um,
Wow.
so yes, there's many kinds of trauma, and and trauma can come in all shapes and sizes. You know, big T trauma and little T trauma. You know, losing a pet can be traumatic. Trauma
Mhm.
is anything that um, is beyond one's ability to cope at the time.
Mm.
It and it can have very lasting effects. It changes the structure of the brain, and we can develop ways of being and behaving in the world as a result of that trauma.
So you brought up something else, and I'm sorry to be bouncing all over the place. It just that question had absolutely nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about. It just you talked about it, and then it sparked curiosity in my brain. But then you brought up something else, and again, it's curiosity. So I know that you're a big fan of Dr. Caroline Leaf, as am I. Um, and I think, in case the listeners aren't familiar with her work, she's proven that the brain actually physically changes based on like what you're talking about, our traumas, our experiences, or even our habits, right? Even our
Mhm.
habits physically change our brain. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Even our thoughts change our brain. Because when we think a thought, we experience an experience, a chemical reaction occurs that communicates from cell to cell. And as that communication is happening between neurons, those neurons are firing together, they're wiring together, and they're creating patterns of experience, patterns of thought, patterns of then behavior. Our thoughts create, or actually our beliefs at the really core create our thoughts and our emotions, which influence our behavior and our habits. So yes, she would definitely argue that what we think changes the structure of our brain, and as a result we act accordingly, whether it be for the good or for our detriment.
Wow. And so that's how you get people that habitually get into certain troubles like addictions or whatever. Is not even necessarily the addictive nature of the compound. It's that that brain structure. I believe you call it a neural pathway that we've
Mhm.
created in that habit that truly gets us addicted. Is that
there's
I'm go ahead.
there's definitely a physiologic component to addiction, where you have the physical signs and symptoms and dependence. And when you take that chemical away, you're going to have withdrawal. So there's a physical component, but I do believe that there is definitely a mental component, a mindset component that is based on our thought patterns and our belief systems and the way our brain functions. Um, its form of way of coping for many people is to turn to a substance because
Right,
they can't manage the feelings, emotions, whatever traumas they've experienced, or they feel like they can't manage it
right.
and they turn to other things.
Super fascinating stuff. I wish we could just keep talking about this stuff, but all right, I'm going to pull us back on topic. And I apologize for taking that little detour. Thank you for what's the word? Indulging my curiosity. So getting back on topic, what are some long-term consequences for not just leaders, just anyone in general? What are some long-term consequences if they go with unmanaged anxiety in the workplace or in their individual personal lives? That unmanaged anxiety, what are we going to look at happening to them in the long term?
Oh, it's going to affect every area of life. Interpersonal relationships can suffer. Um, Obviously, your work productivity can suffer. Your self-esteem can take a hit. Um, it can be pervasive, unchecked. There's not an area of life that wouldn't be affected. I mean, physiologically, you're going to start having physical problems as a result of the anxiety causing so much, that overactive fight or flight stress response. You're going to, cortisol levels are going to go up and then they're going to relatively drop. And then that's going to put people at risk for uh, blood sugar problems, autoimmune problems, chronic inflammation. I mean, the list goes on.
That's really interesting you bring that up because I was watching a study or the discussion of a study that they were doing into PTSD. And that one of the doctors was talking and he'd been researching PTSD for 20 years. And he learned that people that have chronic inflammation are more susceptible to having PTSD from a traumatic experience.
I would argue that it's the traumatic experience that caused that heightened fight or flight response, that stress response that remained hyperactive, that caused the cortisol levels to shift, thus causing inflammation. I don't think it's the inflammation causing the PTSD. I would say it's the trauma promoting the changes in the body.
I'll send you the video I was watching because I possibly, because I'm not a doctor, I possibly totally butchered his argument. But I was more referring to the correlation. Like you're both making that correlation of there being inflammation and this symptom, this thing. And so that I find it super fascinating that our brain can literally destroy us physically, not just mentally or any other, but physically can destroy us if we let it go unchecked and let all these things go untreated whenever they happen.
Right. Untreated is the key, unaddressed, where chronic trauma states don't get resolved, chronic stressors don't get resolved, because there's a cumulative effect. I mean, your body can say it for so long, and then you're going to see some breakdowns somewhere along the line.
Right. That's incredibly fascinating to me. And so I want to ask you then about some possible treatments or effective managing techniques for anxiety. And one of the first things I learned about in my research is CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. You actually have some of that incorporated into your programs, do you not?
I do, and I've taken it a step farther. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on halting dysfunctional thought patterns, for example. They'll identify if your thought processes, say, catastrophic, like you take an issue and you take it to the nth degree, and it's like, well, if I get sick, I'm going to end up in the hospital. If I end up in the hospital, I'm going to get sicker, and if I get sicker, I'm going to die. I mean, that's catastrophizing, a common cold, if you will. And people can do that, but you name the subject and you could take it to the nth degree. So cognitive behavioral therapy would focus on identifying that thought and saying, look, you're being catastrophic in your thinking. Are you really going to end up dying? You have no way of knowing that. You're future tripping, and you can't make that assumption based on this one thing. And so CBT focuses a lot on identifying negative thought patterns and implementing behavioral change, behavior modification at that level. I like to take it a step further and say that we're set up to have certain thought patterns based on what our internal beliefs are that we've internalized from childhood on up. For example, if I believe that life is unfair and no matter how hard I work, I'm not going to get ahead, that's going to affect how I feel about my job, how I perform at my job, my thoughts about my coworkers, my thoughts about my boss. And so just taking it at the thought level is not sufficient enough. You have to get at, that belief system is a faulty belief system. Life being unfair is not reality. So yes, there can be situations that are disturbing, but you can't make that global assumption. But why did somebody develop that idea that life is unfair? And so I'm not so much about getting at the why, what bad thing happened in your childhood that made you think that, but I am about recognizing that our belief systems do fuel the way we think and behave, and that we need to replace our belief systems with healthy belief systems. Personally, I like to borrow from what the Bible says about me. I may think that I'm worthless, but the Bible says that I'm God's masterpiece. Before I was born, he formed me. He knew me, created me. And so replacing adverse belief systems with positive belief systems create a new pathway in the brain, like Caroline Leaf talks about. You're not just creating positive thoughts, but you're changing the way you believe, and those beliefs will translate into positive thoughts, emotions, behaviors. Another exercise that's useful is affirmations. I know it might sound simplistic, but if you start reading positive affirmations over yourself, I am smart, I am capable, I am worthwhile, whatever that may be. And if you can't think of any, ask a friend, because they can tell you a half a dozen things that are positive about you. And you start telling your brain, this is truth. It will translate into better thoughts, better actions, and better life. So I like to take CBT just to the next level.
I like it. And I like what you said about, beliefs, because, and especially when, uh, I want to say it was Cambridge University did a study, and I may be wrong on the university. So if I am, I apologize. But some big think tank university did a study on entrepreneurs and why entrepreneurs are successful. And they found several things, but one of the most fascinating things to me that they found is entrepreneurs are always, or not always, but most of the time, entrepreneurs are unrealistically optimistic. Success, and so that success directly correlates to that unrealistic optimization or optimism. I can't talk. Optimism. Thank you. I'm actually really good at English. You just can't tell right now. But that unrealistic optimism, and then when you couple that with their unrealistic expectations, like, so they have these massive goals of being, the Elon Musk. And, at the time, that's completely unrealistic and not possible. But then they have that unrealistic optimism as well. And so when you couple those two things together, that just gives them fuel, and one's not breaking down the other, right? Because they're overly optimistic. When they fail on their unrealistic expectation, it's okay, because you know what? I'm going to get the next one. And then when they fail in the optimism, the other one picks them up. So they're like constantly feeding each other. And the university, whichever one it was that did this study, said that it was that mindset was overwhelmingly prevalent in like 96% of the successful entrepreneurs that they studied.
Totally makes sense. And I would say that optimism is a choice.
How is that a choice?
So, I mean, Henry Ford said, if whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Mm-hmm. And we are going to move in the direction of our thoughts. And so if our thoughts tend toward negativity and I can't, that's exactly what we're going to manifest, is the I can't. But if you tell yourself and let your mind hear that I can and I will, it will respond accordingly. The brain's just like one big computer. You feed it garbage, garbage in, garbage out. You feed it positivity, it's going to respond accordingly. You're going to see opportunity where the naysayer won't, because you're primed to see the opportunities. It's a confirmation bias.
Right. So I found that whole study is just insanely interesting. And I agree with you 100%. I just can't put a medical spin on why I think optimism is a choice. I believe 90% of the way I think is a choice. It's maybe not an active choice, but it's definitely something, like you said, my belief system or something that I've introduced into my life somewhere along the way is what's causing me to think the way I do. And so I am constantly trying to refine that process and understand it a little bit better so that I can introduce better choices into my life. And I've found like mindfulness meditation really helpful in that process. Do you practice that or encourage your clients to practice meditation or mindfulness, anything like that?
I do encourage mindfulness. I personally am not somebody who can meditate. I just won't sit still. So I have found ways to modify. One of my things that I do to practice mindfulness is I do art. So I like to do
Mm,
dog portraits, and I'll color dog portrait pages. Um, it helps me focus. But another thing I do is like I like to get out in nature and experience nature through my senses. And that's a mindful moment for me because it brings me into the now completely, where I'm fully experiencing my surroundings, whether it be at the beach or on a walk.
mhm. That's interesting. And it's funny because I am very ADHD and I can't sit still. And anytime I try to do a specific thing, I have to fight the squirrels the entire time. In fact, I actually saw a really funny shirt. Um, it was, I'm sure you know the band AC/DC. It was the shape of the AC/DC logo, but it was ADHD. And then I'm sure you know the famous AC/DC song, "The Highway to Hell." It was the highway to, hey, look, a squirrel. And it made me laugh so much because it's so freaking true. That is my life summed up on a t-shirt right there of, oh yeah, squirrels. But for some reason, when it comes to really just sitting still, breathing, and focusing on just trying to learn my mind better, I actually don't struggle with that. And I've always wondered why I'm able to do that. And like literally, I sit down to write an email and it's going to take me 10 minutes because I have to go kill a couple of squirrels in the process because they're chasing me around the room. So, not killing physical squirrels, people don't send me hate mail. Don't get PETA after me. But um, so any idea why that is? Why I'm able to do that?
Because that's what you've set your intention on doing. You've made up your mind that you want to learn and that you want to make improvement. And so
Huh.
you walk in that direction. But it was a choice. You're making a choice to do that. It doesn't just
So
happen magically and wishful thinking.
so the power of my choice, the power of my mind is stronger than my ADHD.
Well, you just learn to make friends with your ADHD.
Hmm. Uh-huh. That actually makes sense. Um, I like that. So again, thank you for indulging my curiosities. But getting back on topic again, um, what are some other tips that you might have for leaders that are struggling to really just reel themselves in? So we've talked about mindfulness, we've talked about CBT. Um, Breathing. Is there anything else really, maybe journaling or something like that, that you would recommend to just really put in your toolbox and start practicing on a daily basis to help yourself deal with anxiety?
So journaling for the sake of journaling, I don't think is as beneficial as people have made it out to be. And the reason I say that is I was reading a study recently on gratitude, and they took 300 students who were seeking mental health care for the first time, and they put them in one of three groups, randomized them to one of three groups. One was just therapy alone. One was therapy plus journaling your thoughts, your feelings,
Mm-hmm.
the events of the day, what have you. And the third group was therapy plus gratitude journaling. So specific kind of journaling where
Mm-hmm.
they wrote a gratitude letter, at least one letter a week. Whether they sent it to someone or not, it wasn't the point, but to practice writing a gratitude journal. And at 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, they found that the first two groups, the therapy alone and the therapy with the just plain journaling, had limited progress, whereas the group that did the gratitude journaling had improved resilience, less feelings of anxiety and depression, clearer thinking. They actually felt better. And so I would say journaling just for the sake of journaling may not be as helpful unless you gear it towards something proactive like gratitude journaling. I used to
Mm-hmm.
think that journaling for the sake of journaling was a good thing, but it can keep you in the problem more than the solution.
Hmm. So you kind of cut me to the quick there, because I'm a big journaler. I love to journal. But when you say journaling for the sake of journaling, I don't think it is. I don't think I do that because I have very specific journals and they have names and they have a very specific purpose. And it's not something I write in every day. For example, I have a goal journal like that. My goals go into that journal with the roadmap to complete said goals. That is the sole purpose. That's the only thing I do in that journal. And I can be weeks without writing in that journal. Um, or I have a creativity journal where anytime I'm faced with a problem that I need to be creative to solve, um, that's where I go to get my creative juices flowing. There are drawings in it, which I'm not an artist. I couldn't draw to save my life, but sometimes that's what I need to really start being creative or see the problem in a different light. I definitely understand what you're saying, but I in my experience in my life, I have definitely found journaling to be very helpful.
Well, you answered your own question there. Your journaling is not journaling the problem, right? You're not rehearsing the problem in the way you've described your journaling. You're either in a creative mode of what's the solution, or you're in a goal setting mode. So the kind of journaling you're doing sounds very proactive and positive as opposed to staying stuck in the problem.
Correct. I very rarely like unless I'm journaling about a problem to try to help myself find a solution. I very rarely will journal complaints.
I would challenge you
Usually,
to journal solutions even before you figure it out. Like if that problem didn't exist, what would the solution look like?
fair enough. Challenge accepted. Now that we've talked about anxiety, we've talked about symptoms, we've talked about treatments, we've talked about identifying it. Next week we are going to move on to the topic of stress. And the reason it's in this order, and I actually asked Dr. Christie before we started recording today's episode, is what order should it be in? Should it be stress and anxiety or anxiety and stress? The reason I put it in this order, just for the sake of you understanding me, is that for me, the only time I really feel stress is when I feel anxiety. And I've learned that like the more anxious I get, the more stress I feel. For in a good example of that is driving on the interstate. That is one of the most stressful things I do, and it drives me nuts because it's not a bad thing, it's not a hard thing, it's just it stresses me out for some reason, and I realize it's especially after talking to you, it's solely because of the anxiety. So anyway, that's why we're doing it in that order. But yeah, next week, Dr. Christie, you're going to be back with us, and we're going to be discussing stress in the workplace. We're going to be discussing stress management, and we're going to be identifying the breaking point really of when it's like, okay, I'm managing my own stress to the point of, okay, this is becoming a serious problem. I need some professional help. So we're going to be talking about that. Anything you want to add to what I just said?
I'm looking forward to that. Sounds amazing.
Sounds amazing. Outstanding. So, everybody, that's going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode of the podcast. But I encourage you to come back next week, and we're going to pick up right where we left off, start diving into stress. And I hope you guys found this helpful, useful, and informative. Dr. Christie, thank you so much for joining us. And as always on the Renowned Leadership Podcast, the guest gets to say or gets to have the final word. So drop us with one more piece of wisdom for our listeners today.
Piece of wisdom. I'm just led back to a Bible verse that says, as a man thinks, so he is.
As a man thinks, so he is. You want to elaborate, or are we just going to leave it at that and let people figure it out?
I'm going to leave it at that.
Outstanding. I love it. All right, everybody, that wraps up this week. So thanks for joining us. On behalf of myself and Dr. Christie, we love you guys, and we never want you to forget to lead like a champion. Goodbye, everybody. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Renowned Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained some really valuable insights from our conversations with top industry leaders and experts. And don't forget to head over to renownedleadership.com to download our free checklist that is specifically designed to help military veterans transition from the military to their new corporate jobs. You can find it at renownedleadership.com. We're also so excited to announce our partnership with the Career Winners Circle, a top executive coaching company with incredible resources for their clients and top-notch coaches. You can learn more about them at careerwinnerscircle.com. And if you're interested in taking your leadership skills to the next level, don't forget to schedule your complimentary coaching consultation with me at renownedleadership.com. And I really hope you guys got a lot out of today's podcast with Dr. Christie. I hope you enjoyed listening to her wisdom and all the things she has to share with us about anxiety. Next week, we're going to be talking about stress and the effect it has on us on our workplace and on our personal lives. We're going to be talking about ways to mitigate stress, especially in the workplace as leaders. And so I hope you guys tune in next week. Don't forget to go check out Dr. Christie at doggonedepression.com. Again, that's doggonedepression.com. Go check her out. She has an amazing program that's getting people results in months rather than years of the traditional therapy. So if you know somebody or you yourself are in need of getting some help with anxiety and stress and depression, highly recommend Dr. Christie. Go check her out. Again, doggonedepression.com. Of course, all her links are going to be in the bio, or the podcast show notes. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. It's going to be in the show notes. And so make sure you hop down into the show notes, check out all her socials, give her some love, and while you're at it, hop over to renownedleadership.com. I'm on YouTube at Renowned Leadership, Instagram at Renowned Leadership, Facebook at Renowned Leadership, so you can find me on all of them, especially LinkedIn at Renowned Leadership or Stephen J. Morris. And make sure you go follow me, give me some likes, and give me some love as well. I appreciate everybody's support. Love you guys, and remember, lead like a champion.